Some people seem to believe that fives must somehow be asexual or non-sexual, but that is actually the result of some kind of distorted caricature that these people may have drawn in their heads about type 5. And indeed, it may be true for some, and especially self-preservation fives in the lower ranges of development, or those who live so much in their head they're disconnected from their bodily needs. These people may indeed be quite asexual or non-sexual, but that's actually a very small group. And as a matter of fact, fives can be extremely sexual, just like any other type. So, although some fives may indeed come across as being asexual, they may actually be exceptionally lusty. But it's just that they may find the entire courtship and emotional attachment to be too daunting and too exhausting. So, let's dive deep into the sex life of type 5, and I promise you this will be very interesting. Type 5 is a head type, and for the head types, sex is to a large extent some kind of mental activity. So, fives and the other head types have a rather cerebral approach to sex. Now, for fives, this means that they are permanently observing, so they can use sex as a venue to learn more about their partner, about the sexual act, about power dynamics, and about the body of their partner and that of themselves, and so on. It also means that they may research lovemaking techniques and then apply them in the bedroom, as if it were some kind of experiment. So instead of just exploring what feels good and being in the moment, they may be compelled to do their research first and then feel competent. So as a result, fives tend to have lots of theories about sex. And as a matter of fact, during our own research, we came across a number of fives who were actually still virgins, but yet they had quite some major theories about sex. So, not amazingly, they may indeed come up with some very interesting thoughts about sex in general, and they can be very much to the point. But, speaking about their personal relationship with sexuality may be quite confusing for a five, because it involves some kind of emotional component which is difficult for them to conceptualize. So here you may often observe the movement to point 7, where fives become scattered, where they contradict themselves, where they're beating around the bush and explain how everything is right and everything is wrong, but they bring in only very little personal content. Fives may often live in their heads and get lost in their own inner world, to the extent that they become detached from their body and feelings. And in some cases, this may indeed lead to this person being indifferent to their own sexual needs and desires, apart from some intellectual curiosity that may be there. And this, in combination with the fear of rejection, may lead them to explore their sexual desires and fantasies in their head instead of physically. And by thinking out every sexual gesture ahead of doing it, they may diminish their own enjoyment of sex. But of course, this is definitely not the case for all fives, because many, and especially sexual fives, may actually have a very, very active sex life. The most interesting phenomenon related to this mental approach is that some fives would call mind sex. So it's getting into the mind of the partner or having the partner get into their own mind. And for them it feels like a mind control thing, and some fives claim it can be so awesome that it can actually bring them to orgasm. During the sexual act, fives may very often be observing, thinking and intellectualizing, so they may not be present in their body, and it may take quite some effort to remind themselves to stay in their body, to breathe and to notice the tactile experiences. But instead they tend to keep track of what is going on, analyze what is happening. So also during the sexual act they are very prone to fantasize, so yet another mental aspect. And all of this can put off the partner quite easily, of course, especially for those partners who experience sex mainly at the physical or at the emotional level. And of course, being in their head also means that fives may be a little bit less spontaneous, which again may further reduce pleasure. Now, after the sexual act, some fives may like cuddling, but even more appealing to them seems to be some kind of post sex analysis. Whereas some people want to process the sexual experience emotionally, fives want to process it intellectually. So they may want to process it analytically with a partner. What was good this time? What was not good? How many orgasms did you have? What was different from the other times? So during our focus group, there was even a social five who said that she even wrote reports after sex because it helped her to analyze what had happened, and it also helped her to get into her feelings. Now, interestingly and very importantly, this joint analysis together with a partner is actually extremely intimate for fives because opening up and discussing this requires a huge amount of trust for them. It's actually their way of building some kind of emotional connection. So the intimacy is not only built by the sexual act, but also by communicating and jointly analyzing it. Now, this may seem very weird to some people, but it's very important for the partner of the five not to devalue this, as it is an important part of how the five experiences sex and sexuality. Another related thing to this mental approach is the compartmentalization of sex. Some fives, and especially the sexual blind, can see sex and relationships as two separate things. Sex is sex, and when it's done, it's done. Sex fits into one box, emotional relationships into another one. A relationship is about intimacy but doesn't necessarily equate to sex. However, when they feel a true connection with a partner, then it's an entirely different ballgame. And also sexual fives tend to compartmentalize sex and relationships much less. However, for those fives who do compartmentalize, it means they can actually be fairly uninhibited in casual sexual relationships because there is no need to be emotionally intimate. Sex in an emotionally intimate relationship can actually be more difficult to them because the compartmentalization doesn't work here. They need to let the sexual partner also into their emotional life. So as a result, some fives may keep some parts of their sex life secret from their primary partner. And it doesn't mean they're involved in anything illegal or immoral, but they just want to keep it separate. They may often be unwilling to share their inner life. So being vulnerable and completely open doesn't come easily to them. I already explained how sex is very much a mental thing for type 5. So let me also get a little bit into more detail about how fives relate to the physicality and the emotionality of sex. Let's start with the physicality. Most fives are not very comfortable in their body, and they can be quite unaware of their body actually, except if they meditate or take care of their body. But being unaware of their body also means that it may be difficult for them to know what they actually like in sex. Now, some fives are quite reserved in terms of kissing, hugging, cuddling, touching, and caressing each other. But of course, there are some others who may enjoy it. But still, for some fives, there may be something mechanical about the way they touch the partner. And this robotic effect can even be enhanced due to their lack of emotionality. Very often, sexual interaction is somehow based on learned behavior, and it's not attuned to the wishes or preferences or desires of the partner. And on top of that, some fives may just grab body parts with little or no sensuality involved, which can of course be a huge turn off for the partner. But on the other hand, many fives do not need much body contact to already feel overwhelmed. Some have a strong skin sensitivity, so they can easily experience touch as too much. So most fives do not like too much physical intensity, but They love the mental intensity that sex can bring. But when fives are getting more healthy, they may actually use sex as a tool to get more comfortable and for getting more in touch with their own body. As a result of that, then they may also get more physically intense, passionate, and playful. This disconnection with the body is also very often noticeable in the sounds they make during the sexual intercourse. All too often, there is not much vocal expression showing that it's pleasurable, and orgasms tend to be pretty silent. Now, the even bigger difficulty for fives, and even more for their partner, is the rather common lack of emotionality, or at least some major challenges with it. Bonding and relating does not come easily for many fives, and it may lead to resentment if they are in a relationship with certain types, especially with twos and fours. It doesn't mean that fives cannot be romantic. On the contrary, some fives are very romantic, but this definitely does not apply to all fives. And as I said before, some fives may incorrectly come across as non-sexual, but it's just that the whole courtship thing, that is often some kind of required prerequisite to sex, feels to them too daunting and exhausting. They may actually desire sex, but sometimes they feel as it's just not worth the effort. As a result of that, they may perceive a one-night stand or a date with an escort as more direct and more honest. It turns some kind of convoluted mating ritual into a simple exchange. And of course, this doesn't mean that all fives prefer one-night stands or commercial sex workers. It's just that they can more easily understand the advantages that it can bring. Because at the end, fives may actually be too stingy to pay for sex, and it may be too much work, too much effort, too much risk. So for some fives, maybe masturbating is an even better way, not having to deal with emotional issues, and especially for self-preservation fives. And again, because masturbation doesn't come with any emotional demands afterwards. And of course, not all fives are like that. Sexual fives can be very, very different, as they still want to find the ideal relationship where sex is definitely part of it. So to go back to the question of an emotional connection, fives are like the opposite of fours. Many fives, again with the exception of sexual fives, do not require an emotional connection or attachment for having sex. Emotions and feelings are scary and unpredictable. Getting in touch with them hurts. Fives have emotions and feelings, but they just tend to disconnect from them. They can crave a deep connection with a partner via sex, but they just don't want the vulnerability at the same time. So, bringing in the emotional energy most often may just take away the fun they may experience in sex. After the sexual act, quite some fives may feel emotionally drained, and they may want some time for themselves. As I already said, some fives may want to cuddle for a bit, but most often they will need some distance, which may incorrectly be perceived by the partner as a rejection. This time alone can mean some sleeping, reading, or going back into themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be physically alone. They just need to retreat somehow into themselves. And again, the sexual five may be very different and may not feel overwhelmed or overloaded with contact, and thus they need less space of their own. Again, this does not mean that there are no feelings involved in sex at all. On the contrary, sex can actually be one of the few areas in life where fives allow themselves to feel their feelings, mostly because they associate sex with positive feelings. Of course, still, the detachment from emotions and feelings may limit their ability to get full pleasure from the sexual act. Finally, this lack of emotionality may also be partially responsible for their inability to read hidden cues and the need for directness. So, for example, if you stand naked in front of a 5 and ask if he or she wants to go to the bedroom with you, there's a high likelihood the 5 will not get the hint. Or if you ask a 5 if he or she wants to take a shower with you, then the 5 is going to interpret that as an invitation to take a shower, but again, without seeing it as an invitation for sex. So one needs to be very direct and just say you want to have sex. Also, foreplay is actually unlikely to be sensual, but more intellectual. What you may not have immediately expected is that 5s tend to have a very strong desire for control, and it already starts with initiating sex. When the 5 is initiating sex, it's done very directly and in a rather dominant way. The 5 knows exactly what he or she wants, but is unlikely to show it in a romantic manner. So the 5 is most likely to initiate sex in a non-verbal way. For example, by grabbing by the butt or boobs, kissing in the neck or something like that. And there is not much sensuality involved in initiating. And here I'm talking about a 5 in a committed relationship where the dynamics are very clear. In the beginning of the relationship or in an unclear situation, the 5 may actually be afraid of rejection, or they may send signals or messages that are not clear and difficult to interpret, and this may give the partner the impression of not being desired. Now, let's go back to the topic of control. During the sexual act, the 5 may appear to be confident and in control. All too often, they want to come across as being in the lead. They know what they want, so they're very direct in it. And especially male 5s may want to create a very masculine impression and play a masculine role. But in reality, it's not truly masculine. It's a bit like, I want to be in control, I want to be in charge, but I also want you to guide me. But I don't want you to guide me too much, because then it would feel as if I'm not in control anymore. And all of this communication is non-verbal, because speaking would bring them back into the head and out of the body. So we could actually say that 5s tend to be more in control of what is happening, so it's more a physical control, but they allow the partner to be in control emotionally. They may feel overwhelmed actually if the partner also takes the physical control. And many 5s may only want their partner to be on top upon their request. So as a matter of fact, 5s may have difficulties in giving up control, and often also in receiving. Now, one reason is that 5s may be a bit selfish, but probably even more important is the vulnerability that it requires for giving up the control, because this can be really terrifying to them. In a non-committed sexual relationship, letting go of control may be a bit easier, but this is more difficult in a long-term relationship where there's true intimacy. And of course, also here, sexual 5s seem to be quite different from the other 5s. The passion of type 5s is avarice, and this shows up in different ways in sex. According to the stereotype or caricature of type 5, this type does not have much energy and may be quite energy efficient. So one might think that as a result, 5s must be quite passive in bed. However, this is actually far from the truth for many 5s. Indeed, some 5s may be quite proud of their sexual asceticism, and they may even perceive or portray it as some kind of sign of their alleged spiritual superiority. But in reality, it's the exact opposite, because this kind of sexual avarice and asceticism is most often just another manifestation of their passion or neurosis. As a matter of fact, they may believe they are asexual, but at the same time, they can be super curious about sex and have lots of fantasies about it. Other 5s may prefer to masturbate, as this is the easiest way of getting their sexual needs met. And even the self-press blind 5 may like to masturbate, because they can just fantasize about the needs of their sexual or social instinct. The fact is that fives are very conscious of what they spend their energy on. But if something is worth it, they may not hold back. Fives use their energy where they have an interest. They may not always feel as if they have enough energy for sex, but the urge for sexual expression may override these considerations of available energy. So, for a self-pres 5, knowing they can get an orgasm can be worth it. Or for a sexual 5, knowing they get an intense and ecstatic experience can be worth putting the energy into it. And for the social 5, knowing it will enhance the bond can also be worth it. So, when the 5 feels that the sexual experience is worth it, they may actually show up with an energetic level that might really amaze you. Still, this is very often very much a mechanical active energy and not an emotionally active energy. Some of this avarice of type 5 is actually quite similar to the qualities of the self-preservation instinct. So the self-preservation 5 is exhibiting the strongest forms of this energy efficiency, retentiveness, contraction, selfishness, and so on. But even and also the self-preservation blind 5 is still going to have some qualities that might seem as if they actually have a rather strong self-pres instinct. For example, many 5s are aware of the amount of energy that is needed. And for some, that may indeed mean they are not overly active, and they may prefer to get their needs met while still being in control, of course. So for many 5s, sex can feel like a lot of work. They may fear some kind of depletion of their resources. So if they know they will have a busy day tomorrow, they may not want to have sex tonight. 5s may like quickies because it's quick and direct, and a long foreplay can be a waste of time, except if this foreplay is not physical but mental and arouses their fantasies. In the case of a casual sexual relationship, 5s also don't want a partner to have any demands or expectations. They may not want to have sex with a casual partner at their house, as this may feel as if they are letting someone into their fortress. They don't want to provide the bed, the parking spot, the towels, whatever. They just don't want to let anyone into their space. So 5s may be quite liberal with their body, but not with their property or with their inner being. Finally, another manifestation of the avarice is the privacy 5s have about sex. Most 5s, and again here the sexual subtype may be less outspoken in this sense, but most 5s do not talk about sex with their friends very often. They cherish their privacy and they are not prone to disclose too much about their sex lives, nor will they actively inquire about this from others. Of course, when somebody else opens up, they will be happy to listen and to absorb information. Some people tend to believe that the difference among the 3 subtypes of type 5 are much smaller than among other types. But this, in my view, is actually not really accurate, and it definitely is not the case with regards to sex. As a matter of fact, the differences between the sexual dominant and the sexual blind 5 is just huge. So let's take a look at some of these differences. The self-preservation 5 is the closest to the caricature of type 5. They're basically double energy efficient. So before sex, they may question, how much energy do I have? Is it worth it? How much sleep do I need tonight? They are also the least likely to have sex if they have a lot of work to do the next day. So as a result, they tend to have less sex and less sexual partners than the other 2 subtypes. Self-preservation 5 is also the least likely to give up too much information or spend non-physical time with a partner. And as a result, many self-preservation 5s will say that the best sex they have had most of their life has actually been masturbation. They're also the most emotionally detached, which implies that sex does not involve me. Sex is just about the physiological release. Of course, there can be an emotional connection with the partner, but this is not always necessary. And as a result, and especially in combination with their need for a great deal of time in quiet and solitude, they may like the anonymity that certain non-committal sexual relationships offer and practice ethical non-monogamy. The sexual five is very, very different from the caricature of the five. They want intensity. They want a connection with the partner. They want to feel alive. They want to be active. So for these fives, there has to be an emotional connection with the partner. They may feel as if masturbation doesn't lead to orgasm, but just to ejaculation. They want to experience the real thing. So masturbation may often feel like some kind of waste of time or energy. They really want to be close and intimate with their partner, and this seems like their purpose in life. As a result, sexual fives crave intensity. And of course, the mental intensity of the fantasies are much bigger than the intensity in the bedroom. But they still can come up with bigger energy than other fives. The desire to merge with a partner supersedes the desire to conserve energy. And then finally, the social five. The social five may hoard energy but care more than the other subtypes about meeting the needs of their partner. They may also be more involved with different groups, so sex may actually get to the back burner more often with them as well.